Well, the Supreme Court is soon going to decide whether the orders of same-sex marriage customers outweighs the First Amendment rights of a private business owner who just doesn't want to create cakes for same-sex weddings. Here to explain this case, please welcome the President and CEO of the Alliance Defending Freedom, Michael Farris. A lot of us have heard about this case out in Colorado. You got a guy that's a baker, and he was asked to make a cake for a same-sex couple. And he said, I'll make cakes. I'll make a cake for you for her birthday. I'll do a lot of cakes, but a cake that involves putting two men on the cake, I just can't do. Now, he got in a lot of trouble over that. What kind of trouble did he get into about this?
The state of Colorado told Jack Phillips that he had to stop making any wedding cakes at all, which is 40% of his business. So he's had to lay off a number of his 10 employees. His business has gone way down because they're frankly trying to run him out of business because he won't toe the line of being politically correct on the subject of same-sex weddings.
The argument has been, well, he's in business, and if you're in business, you can't say, I'm not going to serve certain people. So what's wrong with that argument against Jack Phillips?
Well, he's in a particular kind of business. He's a cake design artist. He would sell them any cookies, cupcakes, anything that was already pre-made. But when it comes to custom design, he, like any artist, has the ability to design only those things that his conscience will permit him to do. For a long time, he doesn't make any Halloween goods. He doesn't make anything that disparages another person. He won't make a divorce cake, for example, that was celebrated.
There are those things?
Well, somebody wanted one, a custom cake for that.
That's a really rough marriage when you celebrate it with a cake. Honey, I'd like to get a cake to celebrate getting rid of you.
Yeah, so,
I mean, that is, hadn't heard of that one.
Yeah, he's refused to make a number of creations that violate his conscience. And so when these two men said, we want you to create a custom cake for our wedding, he said, I'm sorry, my conscience won't allow me to do that. And it's because he's an artist, there's a First Amendment free speech element here. If we're just selling blankets or something, that'd be a different story. But we're talking about a custom artist. The same thing is true of a portrait painter. The ACLU is arguing that anybody who does speech for a business can be coerced to create speech that they disagree with.
So if, let's say I'm a Jewish, maybe delicatessen owner, and somebody comes in and says, I want you to make a cake for me, and I'd like a swastika on it, and I want bacon-wrapped shrimp to be on the side of the cake. I'd have to do that, huh?
Well, it depends on which day the commission.
By the way, my kind of Jewish person who would have bacon-wrapped shrimp,
a man went to 3 more progressive bakeries in Colorado and asked them to make cakes that were opposed to same-sex wedding. And all of them said, no, we're not going to do it. It violates our conscience. The same commission that ruled that Jack Phillips has to create the pro-gay cake said, no, these cake artists are within their First Amendment free speech rights because this offends them. You can just see the utter hypocrisy. It's the best fact in the case, and one of the reasons I believe we're going to win in the Supreme Court.
And this case is going to the Supreme Court?
It will be heard oral argument. My colleague Kristen Wagner from Alliance Defending Freedom will argue it on December 5th, and would ask all your listeners, all Americans, to be praying for this case and for the freedom of speech for all of us.
A lot of people may say, okay, Michael, that's great, gee, that's unfair, but this is a guy in Colorado, he's a baker. What the heck does this have to do with me in, Mississippi or Florida or, New York? Why does this case matter to the rest of us?
For better or for worse, when the Supreme Court of the United States makes a ruling on free speech, it applies to every American. And so the ability of us to disagree with the politically correct elites that run some state and local governments, and ultimately the federal government, is at stake here.
Well, if a person is an atheist and they have a T-shirt shop, and I want them to go and say, I'd like you to make 100 T-shirts that say, Jesus is Lord. Is the government going to force them to make those T-shirts, even though it may be incredibly offensive to the T-shirt maker?
Well, there's an actual T-shirt case going on in Kentucky where they tried to make a T-shirt maker make a pro-gay T-shirt. He didn't want to. And if they're going to follow the law the same way, they would have to do that. But the hypocrisy that we see from state and local governments on this issue really means only the politically incorrect get coerced and not the ones that follow the leftist agenda.
Should we be afraid and worried about the judicial system run amok?
Well, the Supreme Court has unfortunately assumed the power to make law. In a constitutional republic, only our elected legislators should make law, whether they're making statutory law or constitutional law. We have elected legislators because if we don't like the law, we can throw the rascals out. It's extraordinarily difficult to throw the Supreme Court out. And so therefore, when the court starts making law, they've crossed a very important barrier, and we should all be very alarmed at that.
And Michael, this is new. I mean, the whole idea of, I'll call the term judicial supremacy, the idea that the court can supplant both the executive and legislative branches and go straight to not an interpretation of a law, but the imposition of a law.
The Supreme Court now is bathed in a philosophy that says judges are smarter than the rest of us. I had one semester of constitutional law from a Harvard law professor who was a visiting professor at my school in Washington State, Gonzaga. And he brought me in his office one day and said, "Mike, it's too bad we make so many decisions by counting heads rather than by weighing heads." What he meant was the elites, the intellectual elites, should really run the country. And I was being subtly invited to join the elites. I saw what it was. It was an antithetical thing to people who believe in a Republican form of government. We elect people to make laws. We're not run by the people that think they're smarter than us, think they're better than us. American grassroots people need to be able to control our government through the ballot box.
Well, I hope that you are successful at the Supreme Court because there's a lot at stake. And I appreciate very much your helping to explain the importance of this case to all of us. My thanks to Michael Farris, and we're all going to be watching the Supreme Court deliberations that are ahead. By the way, if you'd like to keep up with justice for Jack Phillips, be sure to visit the adflegal.org website. That's adflegal.org website. And let me tell you, this is important because sometimes I hear people say, well, the Supreme Court just ruled. It's the law of the land. And I'm thinking, no, they don't get to make the law of the land. The legislature does. So understand why this is so important.